Kia ora and welcome to chapter 27 of the book, and we're heading into the final straight now. And in this section we're looking at that element in the curriculum around formative assessment and action learning. Action learning is a way of actually modifying our teaching style by informed data. In other words, we collect data to do that, and we'll talk about that in more detail. But the notion of formative assessment means we want to actually assess in a way that informs the learner of their next steps. Because assessment's not an end product. It's a way of directing learners to their goal, whatever there is they're trying to actually manage in the end, to understand, develop ideas around, develop concepts around, and then apply that in their world. So in terms of formative assessment, we want to make sure that young people have all the tool sets they need for that, so the competencies to manage that themselves. As well as that, what is changing now is that assessment is shifting from a written dialogue about what we know to a video about what we know. Because in a video, what a video does, it gives you a whole range of nuance that text cannot do. So in the video, you can see how passionate the person actually is. You can see it in their eyes, their gestures, and what they do, and how they react. You can tell it from the way in which their voice modulates. You can tell it from the language that they use and how they may move stutteringly, fluidly through the course of what they're doing. So video increasingly is going to become the mode of which we do most of our assessment. It's easy to do, and it also cuts out that reading and writing component which actually limits a child in terms of them expressing what they understand. So reading and writing was like a filter, and it gave us, as we mentioned earlier, numbers of times now, that distribution curve. And that distribution curve can be ameliorated to a fair degree by taking reading and writing out and replacing it with them actually showing us a video of what they have learnt and getting them to express that in different ways, through demonstrations, through applications of their learning, to see them actually doing that. And then we can even test them by asking them to apply that understanding to a new context they may not have seen or heard of or experienced before. So formative assessment is not just a matter of taking our present system and adapting it, but reconceptualizing what we want out of assessment. And what we want out of assessment is quick, easy, regular updates to the learner as to how they're going. And once again, the assessors, the people who are going to carry out this assessment, is not just the teacher. Okay? Once the teacher takes on that role of educator-learner, and once that student takes on the role of learner-educator, part of our role as a learner-educator in the classroom is to actually build capacity in each other. And so the learners will carry out most of the assessment process. The educator will therefore have a diminished responsibility in this space and act as a collation agency for that material they produce to represent their learning. And they'll use different types of media, different combinations of media, and they will do some writing and they will do some reading and they will communicate in that manner. But they'll also communicate via video, via imagery. Diagrams are wonderful things, and as you've seen through the book, we communicate a lot of our complex ideas through diagrams because you can visualize that and see the relationship between the elements, even if your reading and writing capacity is quite minimal. So video is the great leveler when it comes to education and learning, and we're gradually starting to appreciate the significance of that and what that means long term. Shelley Clark has talked a lot about formative assessment, and she talks about having shared learning goals, making sure that we have effective questioning, making sure that we've got self and peer and educator assessment tasks, and most importantly, through the John Hattie sort of research that's gone on, how do we actually use the data to provide effective feedback for the learner? Because if we give effective feedback, that directs the learner's capacity to grow their world even further still. So the whole place of this formative assessment process really involves the education community as a whole. We're not talking about just the educator being involved. It establishes a system of expert data-driven instruction that result in the continuous improvement for all students in all classrooms. And this is the work of Fullan et al. You know, they've done some great work in that space, Michael Fullan and the team there, around what effective formative assessment looks like. So the data we get from assessment needs to drive the learning deeper still. And that requires, once again, effective questioning, as Shirley Clarke points out. We have to have good questioning techniques in order to actually have good assessment techniques. The second part of this couplet here is the action learning. So not only are we assessing the learners and they're assessing each other, but also we're standing back and assessing our own pedagogical practices. We need to be able to interrogate our own pedagogical practice using a modified learning process. And you'll see in the diagrams through this chapter that they look similar in some respects to the ones we did when we described the learning process. Because this is a learning process, but it's being contextualized for how does the learner educator and the educator learner modify the practice of teaching and learning. How do we actually change our pedagogy to do that? Because we'll do it bit by bit. And so what we want to do is we want to start with the same way that any learning starts. We're prompted by something. You know, we may look at a set of results from a group of students and think, goodness me, you know, they're not doing very well. We make some changes, we translate that sort of feature of the students into becoming learner educators. We want to see what happens when I give them some agency. And so we want to test the result of that. So we want to have a group that do the normal process and another group that go through and we give them some additional agency. Is there a difference in the outcome, the quality of outcome for those two groups? So that prompt, you go, right, let's do that. You become curious, you're inspired, you do some research around this, and then we start applying it to our context in the classroom. Okay, and we therefore, from our research, we come up with a suggested modification to our practice that might yield some better results. Might is the optimal thing, not always. So we need to collect data around this. So once we've made this we've selected our modification, we can then select a trial group, and we want a reference group and a trial group because we need to reference against the two. Then we need to plan that process. Then we need to design the change in pedagogy to make it as effective as we possibly can. And this will be our first iteration of this change. Right? Then we implement the trial, we collect and we do some data analysis, we assess the validity of what we've done, and then we modify our practice, our pedagogical practice, if the data tells us that is a worthwhile thing to do. If the outcome we have is more consistent with the purpose of education. So the action planning process is a modification of the learning process itself. Specifically for educators. Educators now, everyone, all of them, all of you need to become researchers. Because what you will discover, you can then publish and share with your colleagues around the world. And that's what we're looking for. Historically, professional learning was about finding the magic fix. You know, we'll do inquiry, that will change everything. Well, it didn't quite work. Phonics, that'll change everything. No, it didn't quite work. Unfortunately, a lot of these single practice changes don't change much at all. What we're looking at here is a systemic series of changes to the way we do things. We're iterating our practice bit by bit by bit by bit over a period of about 3 years. Our experience with different clusters of schools in countries as far away around the Middle East, around Asia, around Australia, around here in New Zealand, we've been practicing with schools. We've used them as trials, you know, and they've been fantastic in allowing us into their spaces to suggest modifications. And then we've learnt from modifications. You know, we've got some really special people out there that have done some really amazing things and taken huge risks in changing practice. If I look at Sarah Martin at Stonefields, she's done this amazing piece of work around the changes in pedagogical practice and keeping good data, testing everything all the time. The school there now is a model for many, and many people visit the school to see what happens when young people have agency over their learning. So, have a read of the chapter, have a look at the process, give it a go. Make it simple. Do not complicate this. All right? Do not get really carried away with doing huge amounts of research. You're busy as it is in your job as educators. All right? Giving kids some agency will give you some time. And we'll talk about some other processes in the next few chapters which will assist you in getting some time back as well, including the micro lesson, including teaching to a more conceptual frame. Good luck with that, and thank you very much, and we'll see you soon in the next chapter.